So I've been sitting in this office every single day fighting on behalf of consumers all across this state. And over the years that I've been engaged in this fight, it's developed a very well-honed sense of outrage against the banks, the institutions, and the other powers that be that are abusing consumers and citizens all across the state and frankly all across the country. But two areas of concern that have particularly outraged me recently involve the banks kicking down the doors of people's property and the banks ignoring the rights of soldiers that are serving this country. Now, the two areas are particularly concerning because they violate basic and fundamental rights. I wonder whether Americans really understand what I'm talking about. Do you understand that the banks have taken the position that they have the right to kick down the door of Americans' property whenever they care to conduct inspections of the property? That's right. Let me be very clear about this. The banks are taking the position that when you took out a loan on the property, you gave them the right to kick down your door and conduct an inspection of your property. I find that this violates the very basic tenets of American law and what we think are our constitutional rights. I find that only a judge should be permitted to issue an order that would allow a bank to inspect your property. And yet the banks believe that without notice to you, they can kick down the door and enter your property. I find this particularly egregious in situations where you're not even in foreclosure. And in fact, that's happening. We have new federal guidelines which allow a bank to inspect a property. And I interpret inspect to drive by and maybe click a photograph or two. But I don't believe that that language allows a bank to forcibly enter your property. And this is one of the great conflicts that's developing all across this country. And you frankly wouldn't believe the fight that you engage in when you're fighting with the banks on this point. The second area of very real concern that I find most disturbing are the violations of soldiers' rights. Now, there's an act called the Servicemember Civil Relief Act, and what this law seeks to state is that it is a matter of national security when our soldiers are serving an active duty for them to be worried about what's happening to their family or their property back home. And so the Servicemember Civil Relief Act states very clearly that if you're in active duty, certain actions can't happen. You're entitled to a stay or a pause of the proceedings until such time as you're able to defend yourself. But this is another area where the banks are frankly ignoring that act of Congress and taking actions against soldiers sometimes when they're serving in harm's way. So think about this. You know how frustrating it is dealing with the banks when you're trying to get a modification or get any credit for payments or whatever else. But consider that you are on the phone with the bank while bullets are whizzing past your head or while bombs are flying above you. Clearly that can't happen. It shouldn't happen. And yet it's happening all across this country. The Servicemember Civil Relief Act is a matter of national security. And it's stated right in the act that in order to protect this country, our servicemen and women shouldn't have to worry about losing their home while they're serving abroad or being embroiled in civil litigation while they're serving their country. These are two areas of particular concern that I want us all to be focused on. I want us as a country to ask ourselves, should the banks be permitted to kick down the door of your property without an order of the court, number one? Number two, should the banks be permitted to throw soldiers or their families out into the street while they're serving abroad? I stand very strongly for the proposition that none of that should occur and that we need to work together to make sure the banks don't continue to get away with what they're doing, and that is violating those basic rights.